Hello and welcome to a drifting this a drifting channel. This is a web novel, web fiction, and basically a general like web novel analyst and reviewer type of channel. I was gonna say webtoons, web fictions, manga, manhwa, and anime and whatnot. But as I said, it's a huge scope, and I want to try and keep it focused. So today we have a very interesting topic at hand. The title of this video, if I did it correctly, is how to read long web novels and finishing them. So really quickly before we go further, I'll probably just set a quick context. I might cut it out and just post the full video in BTS. But there are just some interesting thoughts going through my head when I was making this video. I just want to talk about some of the preparation before I started recording the audio and before I started animating. So I had this long idea, I think, just as a straight idea, when I was doing a podcast. I've mentioned it before about the difficulties of finishing long web novels, right? So I'll probably leave this in the video. But, there's quite a lot of difficulty in reading web novels, right? Especially some of the longer ones. So I decided I wanted to talk about that experience, how to read long web novels and go on about that and so forth. But there are a couple complications, right? I knew I wanted to talk about that. I wanted to go in that direction. So I started exploring that, and I started to explore what type of tone did I want it to make this. Did I want it to make it like a masterclass, a WikiHow or Wikipedia page, like a tutorial, right? Did I want it to be very technical about it, right? I could go through various tips and tricks, right? And I said, what type of character do I want to be? Right. So I was thinking about these various inspirations and like various styles, right? There are people like, Professor Lando, these very young, very, very cultured, very, very, astute professors, right? Channels like Beyond Ghibli, Accented Cinema, Kurzgesagt, and like very analytical, right? As I said before, I look to various people in the industry and technical people doing the similar things like, Weeb Psycho, for web novels, Webtoon Master, and then, the various anime, the kings of anime, the Pope and the figureheads, people like Gigak UK, right? Gigak, Grant, Joey, basically the anime man, and Sea-Dog VA, right? Trash Taste podcast fans unite. But yeah, so I was looking to them and I was thinking, like, who do I want to be? Like, and it's like, I think I definitely wanted to be like on the older side. So I don't want to be like, I don't want to be like super old that I'm like, a wise old man. I'm an elder. I'm like this turtle. Like, I don't want to be like super wise and decrepit and ancient. But I also don't want to be like, a young man. Like, as you can tell, like, my voice isn't very deep or convincing. So it's kind of hard. But, I am decently aged. I have that sense of authority, which is kind of, contradictory to like saying it. So, I had this image in my head, right? Do I want to be like Ben Fee and Bakoan, or do I want to be like, Professor Lando? Who are some of the other examples that I've written down? Yeah, like I'm not a young kid. I'm like an adult. Kind of weird to say. But yeah, so I was like thinking, I wanted to be something closer to like, a more middle-aged writer, like a greasy uncle, not like, ugly bastard, but like, just an uncle, right? So it's like, coming up with nicknames, and I was thinking, oh, this is a fun character, right? Like, because a lot of the readers, a lot of the people listening to this are going to be people who don't necessarily have the same experiences that I do. You guys are reading in a different time than I am, right? Like, we when I was reading, we were reading in the time of the Wild West, translated fictions, right? Nowadays, people in the future are going to get machine translated web fictions. Like, most of the translations are already assisted by machines. Maybe in the future it'll be completely machines. Some of us actually had to read RAWs and we had to translate it by hand, get a Chinese English dictionary. I don't know who still uses a Chinese English dictionary, but I remembered when I was a kid, right, I had to look through a Chinese English dictionary and ask a grandparent or something and just try and understand the meaning. So this character equals this, that character equals that. So it's like, now you have Google Translate, and now all of it's done. You have Google APIs, Microsoft APIs, Vision APIs, various OCR, optical character recognition software that'll automatically do it for you as long as you know how to code and how to utilize that API properly. You could do the same thing with manga and anime, by the way, but it's much more difficult, especially since anime is very dynamic, and manga is so long. So it's kind of limited in usage mainly. But in the future, if you create like dynamic API and you're able to afford and pay for that machine translation, you could definitely watch machine translated anime or machine translated visual novels, which is insane, right? Like machine translated visual novels, that'll be something. But yeah, so there was a little bit of a conflict of how I wanted to do it. I came up with like this persona, right? Because it's like, I'm kind of like this disembodied voice. Like I have a channel photo and like, various accounts and whatnot, but like I was looking into some various options, VTubers, PNGs, right? Like disembodied voice, like a narrator. Like I don't think I really want to insert myself too much into it. Like I want to kind of stay separated, like stay private, but like still talk about all these amazing things. You can like go through my podcast and I'll just be this disembodied voice. But yeah, I was looking into stuff like, PNGs and like what type of persona I wanted to craft, like, what nicknames I wanted to go with. And a funny one I came up with is Uncle Die, as in Uncle Dyer, but like without the R, so it's like Uncle Die. Not D-I-E, kind of. Pinging wise, it's Uncle Die. Like, like Uncle D, right? Uncle D is D-I or just D-D-E-E, right? Like John D or something. No, but I think Uncle Dyer, right? Like, yeah, we could do Uncle Dyer. I don't mind Uncle Dyer. That actually be quite funny. The reason why is I'll give a quick hint to what that might mean is Uncle Dyer likes to give out pouches of 8-pound oranges, and it's like an approachable uncle, and then like a lot of people who are probably watching and listening to this probably gonna be younger, probably like just interested, right? Okay, and one last thing, coming up with the title, right? Like, so I went through a lot of iteration and various changes, right? I was looking at my titles and I was like, this doesn't make any sense, right? Because originally I wanted to write about like, how to finish web novels, right? But then it sounds like I'm promoting like, writing web novels, right? Or how to complete a web novel, still sounds like writing, right? Then I started coming up with titles like, how I read web novels, or how to read web novels, or how to read long web novels. And these kind of just sounds like tutorials and tips and tricks, right? Like how to increase your reading speed, how I read like 110 plus web novels, 100 plus web novels. And then, I have a various animation that I kind of want to experiment with, right? So hopefully it's going through that iteration, and then, I put in the sound effects. If not, then it'll just be a blank screen. But yeah, so there are a couple like titles, right? So I was experimenting with some clickbait ones, right? Like how I read like 100 plus chapter web novels, and, and so on and so forth. Or like how I read over 100 plus 100 plus chapter web novels, right? Over 20, over 50, right? Substitute in your number, right? Nothing super crazy like, 5,000 or 10,000. I know people who are able to do that, but no, I am not at that level. I am just a mere mortal. I am just a very normal and humble reader. But yeah, so there are a couple ones I was experimenting with, and then I came across a more subtle one, like reading web novels with, 100 or 200 chapters, maybe 300, right? And it's very subtle, very blunt, very, very realistic. And I was thinking, like, I don't know. I have a couple, like, like concrete, like rules or like principles I don't want to break. Various ones involving like licensing, credit, advertising, monetization, and just clickbait titles, right? It's like, I understand that, clickbait titles is kind of like the lingua franca. It's like the vernacular of the internet. It's how we communicate to each other efficiently, right? Fast food, consumerism, right? Sometimes you don't want to spend like 10 years on a movie. You just want to be able to consume a decent movie every year or so, right? Because that's entertainment, right? And then, like, the way you are able to communicate quickly with someone just scrolling through YouTube and reading web novels or watching web novels is a catching title, right? A beautiful cover and a good summary. Those are the three things that will most likely get people to read or grab people's attention, right? And that's like, how you get publicity, right? That there's the various entertainment quotes like, if $1 billion entertainment and fashion companies like, Prada and Gucci, right, and Dyer, right, Dior, Dyer, have to, advertise their own, perfume, their bags, their purses, their shoes, then why shouldn't the average consumer, why shouldn't the small business, right? Like these brand names, million and billion dollar brand names, they're spending so much money on advertising, then so should you. There's no shame in advertising. There's no shame in, trying to get publicity and getting promotion. Sometimes there are certain places where it's frowned, especially where it's not in the rules, but there's nothing wrong with it, right? As long as you aren't like deceiving people outright, then it's okay, right? So, and then there are like just various lines that I like to focus on. So I wanted to go with something simpler, like, how to read long web novels to completion, which in my mind, like, was okay, but like, it kind of missed the connotation. So, I eventually settled on the title that I did get to, which was, there's a couple more iterations, finishing, 100 plus chapter web novels, how I finished reading web novels. And I kept thinking, that's more writing style. But like, I imagine the animations that I wanted to insert, right? Divergence, like, water carving stone, right? Rubbing the needle against the stone, right? You can even talk about like some of the building blocks of engineering and rubbing things together for precision, right? And just rubbing rocks against each other for sharpness and flatness, right? So yeah, there's a couple more titles. I iterate through various words, like how I think I have like 20 titles here, very much what I used to do in certain occupations that I won't mention at the moment. But you may be able to figure it out, you may not, but I won't mention too much into that. So how I finished reading web novels, right? And how I read web novels with over like, 80 chapters to completion, and so on and so forth.